If you've been playing fighting games for eons like I have, then there's no doubt that you'll have seen some particularly puzzling imagery over the years, and I believe that this is one of the genre's greatest assets. Throughout the 30+ year history of the medium, there have been countless wacky character designs, game mechanics, balancing, and even names. Seriously, I feel for those who don't speak English as a first language and try to make sense of this chaos. Okay, now that we're acquainted with the insanity that is fighting games, allow me to introduce probably the most head-scratching fighter I've ever played, one that I'm still trying to make sense of even after running netplay tournaments for it. First released in November 1996 before being ported to all sorts of systems over the years, Waku Waku 7 is what happens when you give an anime fan in a laser tag room way too much caffeine, and I can't even begin to describe what the hell is going on here. If the idea of a comedically colourful 2D fighter appeals to you, then you're gonna want to stick around, but before we go any further, I need to make something clear. Waku Waku 7 has some really egregious flashing lights, and as I don't want anyone watching to have a seizure, I'm going to include warnings before the flashing appears. Don't worry, I've got you. Now that we're ready to dive into anime land, let's buckle up and explore all there is to know about Waku Waku 7. When playing through arcade mode, the title's crazy demeanor got me thinking, who exactly made this game and what compelled them to go completely balls to the wall? Founded during April 1971 in the Japanese city of Konan, Sun Corporation, or better known as Sunsoft, spent the rest of the decade manufacturing pachinko machines, cocktail arcade cabinets, and home computers. But it wasn't until October 1978 when they released their first original titles, Block Challenger and Block Perfect. Using the experience they had gained on these titles, as well as their games from the 80s like Arabian and Iki, Sunsoft noticed just how popular the fighting game genre was becoming due to the unbelievable success of Capcom's Street Fighter II, and they wanted a piece of the Blanca-flavored pie. After getting ready to go full steam ahead, Sunsoft released Sugoi Heberiki in 1994 for the Super Famicom. I'm sorry for butchering your language, Japan, I don't know how to pronounce the game. And it's a kind of top-down party fighting game thing. Their next title, 1995's Galaxy Fights Universal Warriors, runs on Neo Geo hardware, and it's much more conventional. One of 8 fighters can be chosen by players, and battles take place on infinite stages set in outer space. Its dark science fiction aesthetic is quite unique for a 30-year-old fighting game, and after playing it for myself, I could instantly tell that this game is the foundation for Waku Waku 7. The gameplay feels similar enough for me to have made that mental connection, but it's not identical, so it was fun to see what was brought over for Waku Waku and what was cut. But wait, hang on. These 3 games were released year after year, right? So where are the previous Waku Waku games? Isn't it meant to be the 7th game in the series? Funnily enough, this isn't the case, with the 7 in the game's title being used to represent the 7 playable characters, as well as the 7 Waku Waku balls in the story. These were an obvious parody of the Dragon Balls, as whoever collects them all will have a wish granted, tying into the game's humorous nature. This is all well and good, but when I attempted to research why the game attempted to parody fighting game and anime tropes, I came up short-handed. Waku Waku 7 is quite the obscure fighter outside of the die-hard fighting game crowd, and I'm not sure if there are any accessible developer interviews or retrospectives that explains its design philosophy. I searched high and low and chased any lead I could find online, but the in-depth details concerning the title's development process have seemingly been lost to time. Even searching for specific members of the game's development studio unfortunately led to nothing substantial. The only verifiable information I could find about Waku Waku 7 relates to its name, with the phrase Waku Waku being a Japanese onomatopoeia used to convey excitement. Going back to Sunsoft's intentions when creating all of this madness, I have 2 theories. Either they set out to intentionally satirize popular video game and anime conventions to poke fun at them, or they genuinely tried to fit into those stereotypes to neatly belong in the zeitgeist. In my mind, the first is the most probable, as I don't see why a studio known for creating uniquely wacky titles would suddenly try to follow trends. If this were the case, then Sunsoft would have ditched Galaxy Fight's offerings and just had their next game be something like Street Fighter II or even Fatal Fury. The development team probably wanted to create a body of work that was refreshingly lighthearted, with tongue-in-cheek mockery of popular cliches being used to attract audiences. It's a genius play, as both anime and fighting game fans familiar with what the title is parodying can use that knowledge to easily connect with these exaggerated versions of their favorite properties. Nothing is safe in Waku Waku 7, as if you can think of recognizable character traits in Japanese media, there's a high chance that it shows up here, and I believe that this is something only the Japanese could do with this level of accuracy. Anyone can attempt to perform satire, but only those who truly understand the ins and outs of what they're mocking can intelligently highlight its unintentionally hilarious characteristics. In other words, if Waku Waku 7 were developed by a Western studio who weren't totally familiar with Japanese humor, I don't think its comedy would have been as endearing, and it could only have included surface-level observations of what was popular in Japan at the time. In reality, this ends up being one of the most authentically Japanese fighting games I've ever played, from its manga-inspired cutscenes to its layered meter system, and I'm convinced that only Sunsoft could have pulled it off. But enough about the backstory of this Shakespearean odyssey, because I think it's about time that we jump into its gameplay. Sunsoft may have taken inspiration from Galaxy Fight's mechanics for Waku Waku 7, but the two games feel different enough to stand apart, with Waku Waku bringing plenty of new options to the table. Right off the bat, I'll make it clear that despite Waku Waku 7 containing universal system mechanics that theoretically should make every character feel the same to play, their individual, normal, and special moves prevent this from occurring, and we'll cover these in a bit. The most prominent change from Galaxy Fight is that stages are no longer infinites. Yep, there are walls now, so I hope you don't find yourself with your back to the corner. If you do, don't fear, as there are 4 attack buttons here, 2 punches and 2 kicks, leading to character-specific normals with varying ranges and speeds, so it's up to you to find a fighter that has pokes that fit your style of gameplay. Arena is a Shoto, Polar Z is a Zoner, Slash is a mix-up demon, and Rai is a busted top tier, just to name a few. Out of all of the fighters, Maru has to be my favourite, as although Super Combo Wiki reports that none of his matchups are in his favour, I love his big damage and unblockable supers. He's really adorable too, and the girl on his back reminds me of Mortal Kombat's Ferrotor. As previously mentioned, every combatant is supposed to be a parody of a specific anime trope or character, and they all look and sound the part. Rai is a shonen protagonist, Maru is Totoro, Tess is a robot maid, Dandy J looks like old Joseph Joestar and Indiana Jones, and Arena is a seinen protagonist, mostly thanks to her massive anime eyes. What I find particularly intriguing is that due to their explosive designs, different players can interpret these parodies in their own ways, and maybe you'll even disagree with some of the comparisons I've made. It proves how timeless these characters are, and their animations do a fantastic job of expressing personality. I found that despite forgetting everything about Waku Waku 7 when I returned to it for this video, it felt quite intuitive and natural, making the experimentation process quite easy. Contrary to what you might think, there are no Magic Series combos with safe jump-in options, rapid teleportation, or whatever wild concept you could think of being in an anime fighter. Rather, Waku Waku's gameplay is a bit slower, as although characters can sprint to their heart's content and throw out some big special moves, there's an emphasis on neutral and punishment. Characters can often feel quite slippery when running and jumping, with the closest comparison I can think of being the ice levels in 2D platformers, so this does take some getting used to. If your opponent likes to defend against your normals by blocking low, you can press 2 buttons of the same strength when standing to perform a universal overhead. I love this mechanic, as it's nice having an option to shatter the enemy's defense, and it predates the same system found in 1997 Street Fighter 3. Another shared system is the Waku Waku throw, and this serves to give every character a command grab in addition to their regular throws. I can't say that I've seen anything like this in another fighting game, and I think it technically means that every fighter is a grappler? Perhaps that's a stretch, but at least everyone has the semblance of a strike throw mix-up. After you slam the enemy to the ground, press up and any attack button to follow up with a pursuit. These are straight out of Darkstalkers, and if you time it poorly, they can miss, but if you get it just right, they can be used to reposition closer to the enemy. Thankfully, defensive tools haven't been forgotten about here, as holding up during a recovery will perform a wake-up strike. These are usually minus on block, however, so don't get too predictable. If you want to escape pressure without striking, tech rolls are available too. Other than these mechanics, the moment-to-moment gameplay isn't anything super crazy, at least by today's standards. Multi-hitting DPs, impossibly fast sword slashes, and wall bounces would have felt like a breath of fresh air in the 90s, especially if you use meter to land them. This builds the same way it does in every other fighting game, but you can hold up to multiple bars at any given time, and there are also numerous ways to spend it. The first of which involves the X moves, and these are your enhanced special attacks. If you've ever played Street Fighter or Darkstalkers before, then you'll know what to expect, so I won't get into them too much, but I will say that thanks to the game's impactful animations, they feel great to do. Going up a level brings us to Doki Doki attacks. These get their name from the Japanese onomatopoeia for a rapid heartbeat, and they serve as your supers. Most characters only have one, whereas Rai and Dandy J are lucky enough to have 2, and these moves can do all sorts of things. Now, before I show any of them, I recommend looking away if you're sensitive to flashing lights. Every fighter possesses unique supers that demonstrate their individual capabilities, as well as doing some massive damage. The downside is that they have noticeable startup, so aware opponents can react and block in an instant. It gets even crazier though, as Hara Hara attacks are unblockable supers with over 100 frames of startup, but should they connect, your opponent is definitely getting sent to the ER. Characters are completely vulnerable during the startup portion however, so they can easily be punished, making these moves very, very situational. Believe it or not, but that's not all, as you can press 3 buttons to enter Super Mode. This install lasts for 6 seconds and provides players with amazing benefits, like higher damage output, chip damage on normals, and less damage taken. The mechanic sounds quite simple on paper, but it can be used effectively by both players, no matter what their health bar looks like. Comebacks are easier to perform when you have extra damage, but you still need to work to open the enemy up, so I feel that it doesn't give the initiator a massive advantage. Super Mode also provides players with long-term decision making, as although you can instantly use meter right now for a Doki Doki or Hara Hara, saving it for later could help you out if you take a beating. It provides enough strategy to remain stimulating for experienced players while also being accessible enough for newcomers to enjoy it too. All of that is to say that Waku Waku 7 has a boatload of systems to learn, and the distinctive attributes found in the fighter's move list make it a fresh experience every time. There are some questionable balance choices found within some of the top tiers, but if you manage to jump over the initial hurdles, you'll have a lot of fun coming up with flashy combos and resets. The elephant in the room regarding humour is that not everyone will find the same things funny, so I can imagine how relieved Sunsoft must have been when they found out Waku Waku 7 was a success. Publications like the UK's Computer and Video Games and Japan's Neo Geo Freak wrote positively about the game, and out of curiosity I translated the Japanese reviews into English for us to read, so I hope they're accurate. It seems that in both its native Japan and not so native Great Britain, Waku Waku 7's colourful art style was heavily praised, with emphasis on its fluid animations. Over in America now, All Games 1998's review mirrored these positive opinions while also stating that the title's stage and audio design were superb. I personally wholeheartedly agree with these sentiments, as even when you return to the game all these years later, it looks incredible. Everything is so vibrant and captivating and it looks sick. Thanks to the Waku Waku 7 boom in arcades and on the Neo Geo, Sunsoft released the game in Japan on the Sega Saturn, but here's where things get a bit dicey. Players needed to purchase a RAM expansion in order to run the game on the console, and although this wasn't a new venture, I can't imagine players would have been happy, mostly because it was a straight up port of the arcade version with minimal extra content. As I can't read Japanese, I can't vouch for how accurate these review translations are, but it seems that a whole new set of issues were written about here. Increased loading times, frame rate drops, and a lack of engaging new modes for the home console players were the reviewers' major complaints. Also, I find it hilarious that the Japanese critic on the right picked Fernandez, a boss character, and complained that he was too strong, while also basing most of his review around our spherical friend. Like, that's the whole point of a boss character, dude, he's supposed to be overpowered! Now, I would love to try the Saturn version out for myself, but I've never been able to get Saturn emulation working properly. At this point, you would think that Sunsoft would capitalize on the growing trend of title updates in the fighting game market by introducing some new characters in a game update, but no such thing took place. Instead, the company moved on to other projects, and poor Waku Waku was left to rot in the jail cell of obscure fighting games. However, that doesn't mean Sunsoft didn't attempt to continue the franchise, as a sequel titled Shin Waku Waku 7 entered development during the mid-90s. Slated to also release on the Neo Geo, Shin was never officially announced, and its only public documentation comes in the form of concept art released on Sunsoft's Twitter account. It seems as though the original roster was set to return, as well as some new fighters, one of which being Galaxy Fight's Rumi. However, my favourite of the bunch is this guy, as he reminds me a lot of Leorio from Hunter x Hunter. Other than this amazing artwork, there were no extra details I was able to find, so I assume the project was quietly cancelled shortly after its initial internal planning stages. The story doesn't end there though, as 2010 saw a digital re-release onto the Wii via the Japanese eShop, with retrospective articles from 2012 remembering the game for its wacky antics. Later that decade, ports for the PS4, Xbox One, and Switch were released, with the game once again reviewing well. With that being said though, Waku Waku 7's characters have had minimal impact going forward, as outside of Arena appearing in an obscure Japanese mahjong mobile game, there have been no sightings of the others. Despite this, I noticed that the gameplay mechanics and presentation style of Waku Waku 7 live on, as its bombastic attacks share properties commonly found in more recent fighting games. Anime-inspired fighters, as well as the medium itself, have both exploded in popularity since the 90s, with there being countless new properties to parody, so I believe that if the series were to ever come back, it could perform well, I think? As game budgets consistently increase over time, venturing into the fighting game space with the intent to resurrect a dormant IP could end up backfiring spectacularly, so I understand why no attempt to bring back Waku Waku 7 has been made. The series simply doesn't have the brand recognition associated with the genre's big dogs, making it almost impossible for Waku Waku to shine in today's ecosystem. To make matters worse, the game's original character designer, Koji Kida, sadly passed away in 2017. This is a heartbreaker, and with how marvelous I think his Waku Waku work is, a continuation might not feel the same without him. It's a real shame that Waku Waku 7 never received any form of continuation, as I think its absurd humor and unique character archetypes could translate well onto modern hardware. The characters ooze with personality, with their animations and sound design still being enjoyable in the modern era of fighting games, so I can confidently say that on an aesthetic level, Waku Waku 7 holds up beautifully. Okay, don't get me wrong, I find it hard to believe that a Waku Waku revival would set the world on fire or anything like that, but with the seemingly infinite number of new fighting games and characters that have been released since 1996, a follow-up would have so many avenues to explore with its comedy. I can imagine that contemporary developers familiar with anime fighters could intelligently satirize them by poking holes in their suspension of disbelief. For example, Waldstein should be able to destroy Mika just on size alone, but this wouldn't be any fun, so of course she can give him a run for his money. This is only one basic example I've thought of, mind you, and in a better world we would all bear witness to a true Waku Waku 7 sequel. If you haven't played this title before and are interested in giving it a shot, I highly recommend it. The game isn't too hard to learn, and you can easily spend some time figuring out how its off-kilter characters function, especially if you look up a detailed guide online. Okay, if you made it all the way to the end, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate your time, and I hope you had fun. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.